The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Clifton General Store, and Fiona Laurent knew the moment she opened her mouth. Everyone would know she didn't belong. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of this copper mining town, nestled in the rugged mountains. So different from the misty green hills of Ireland she'd left behind 2 months ago. She clutched her worn leather satchel tighter as the driver opened the door, his weathered face neutral but his eyes curious. 3 other passengers had already disembarked, and now it was her turn to step into this new life she'd scraped together every penny to afford. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting his hand down. Even those 2 simple words carried the thick brogue that marked her as foreign, and she saw his eyebrows lift slightly before he tipped his hat. "Welcome to Clifton, miss. You got folks here." "I'm meant to work at the boarding house," Fiona replied, keeping her words few. Mrs. Patterson had hired her through letters, needing help with the influx of miners who descended on this corner of Arizona territory in 1882. The copper boom had transformed Clifton from a sleepy settlement into a bustling town almost overnight, and boarding houses couldn't keep up with demand. The driver nodded and hauled her trunk down from the top of the coach. "That'll be Mrs. Patterson's place, 2 streets over." "Can't miss it. Biggest house on Cedar Street." Fiona thanked him again and tried to lift her trunk, but it was too heavy. She'd packed everything she owned, which wasn't much, but it included her mother's iron skillet and her grandmother's quilt, things she couldn't bear to leave behind when she'd fled the poverty and famine that still gripped parts of Ireland despite what the newspapers claimed. A young boy of about 10 noticed her struggling and ran over. "I'll help you, miss, for 2 bits." She nodded gratefully and pointed toward Cedar Street when he indicated the direction. As they walked, Fiona kept her eyes down, but she could feel the stares. Clifton was a rough town, its streets lined with saloons and supply stores, the air thick with dust, and the constant sound of ore wagons rumbling past. Men outnumbered women 10-1 here, and a new female face drew attention like lightning to a rod. The boarding house was indeed the largest residence on Cedar Street, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Patterson herself answered the door before Fiona could even knock, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and flour on her apron. "You must be Miss Laurent. You're punctual, I'll give you that. Come in, come in." She paid the boy his 2 bits and ushered Fiona inside, already talking a mile a minute about the house rules, meal times, and the expectations for her work. Fiona tried to respond, but Mrs. Patterson barely paused for breath until she finally asked a direct question. "You understand English well enough, don't you? Your letters were clear, but that accent is thicker than molasses." Heat flooded Fiona's cheeks. "Yes, madam, I understand perfectly well." "Good. Some of the boarders might give you trouble about it. Mining men can be crude. You just ignore them and do your work. I need help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and serving meals. You'll have Sundays off after breakfast is cleared, and your room is upstairs, last door on the left. You'll share with my daughter Clara, but she's visiting her aunt in Silver City this month, so you'll have it to yourself for now." The work was harder than Fiona had imagined, and she'd imagined it would be difficult. Mrs. Patterson ran a tight ship, feeding 20 boarders 3 meals a day, keeping their rooms clean and doing mountains of laundry in the dry Arizona heat. But the hardest part wasn't the physical labor. It was the shame that burned through her every time she had to speak. The boarders were mostly miners, rough men who'd come from all corners seeking fortune in the copper mines that honeycombed the mountains around Clifton. Some were kind enough, nodding their thanks when she refilled their coffee or brought out platters of beef and potatoes. Others made jokes she pretended not to hear, imitating her accent in exaggerated tones that made the table erupt in laughter. "Top of the morning to ye," one would say in a terrible approximation of her voice. "More spuds, if you please," another would add, and they'd all roar. Fiona learned to serve meals in near silence, pointing to dishes rather than naming them, nodding instead of speaking. Mrs. Patterson noticed after the first week, "You're quieter than a church mouse. The men aren't going to bite you for asking if they want more coffee." "I'd rather not say much, madam, if it's all the same to you." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "It's the accent, isn't it? They're just ignorant fools who have never been farther than the next county. You speak just fine." But the kindness only made the shame worse somehow. Fiona had been proud of her voice back home, had sung in the church choir and recited poetry at community gatherings. Here, it marked her as other, as less than, as someone to be mocked. So she kept silent whenever possible, and the loneliness settled into her bones like the desert cold that descended each night. 3 weeks into her employment, a new guest arrived at the boarding house. Fiona was scrubbing the front steps when she heard the horse approach. The steady clip-clop different from the usual frantic pace of the miners heading to or from their shifts. She glanced up and saw a man dismounting from a handsome bay gelding, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a cattleman's hat and boots caked with honest dirt. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, and when he tied his horse to the post and climbed the steps, he tipped his hat to her. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that held traces of Texas in its drawl. "This Mrs. Patterson's place?" Fiona nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She stood and wiped her hands on her apron, then opened the door and called for Mrs. Patterson, relieved when the older woman appeared quickly. "Mr. Nash, right on time. I got your telegram. Come in, Mrs." Patterson ushered him inside, and Fiona returned to her scrubbing, trying not to be curious about the stranger. His name was Bridger Nash, she learned at dinner, and he wasn't a miner. He owned a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of Clifton, up in the mountains where there was still decent grazing land and water. He'd come to town on business and would be staying at the boarding house for a few days, while he met with various merchants and the banker about expanding his operation. Fiona served the evening meal as usual, moving silently around the table with platters of food. The regular boarders peppered Bridger with questions about ranching, cattle prices, and whether he'd had trouble with rustlers or Apache raids. He answered easily, his manner friendly but reserved, and Fiona noticed he had kind eyes, a warm brown that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Miss, could I trouble you for more coffee?" he asked when she passed behind his chair. She nodded and went to fetch the pot, returning to fill his cup without a word. "Thank you kindly," he said, looking up at her directly. "I don't believe I caught your name." Fiona's throat tightened. She could feel the other boarders watching, waiting for the entertainment of her accent. "Fiona," she managed, just the one word. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Fiona. I'm Bridger." She nodded again and escaped to the kitchen, her heart hammering. Mrs. Patterson was pulling an apple pie from the oven and gave her a curious look. "You're flushed. You feeling all right?" "Just warm from the stove, madam." But it wasn't the stove. There had been something in the way Bridger Nash looked at her, a genuine interest that was different from the miner's crude attention. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite name. The next morning, Fiona woke before dawn as usual to help Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast. They worked in comfortable near silence, frying eggs and bacon, mixing biscuit dough, brewing large pots of strong coffee. The boarders began trickling down around 6, the miners needing to reach the pits by 7. Bridger appeared last, freshly shaved and looking more rested than most of the other men. "Morning, ladies," he said. "Something smells mighty fine." "Fiona's biscuits," Mrs. Patterson said with pride. "Best in the territory, I'd wager. Girl's got a gift." Fiona felt her cheeks heat as she set a basket of said biscuits on the table. She'd learned to make them from her mother, who'd learned from her mother, a recipe that crossed the ocean in memory alone. "I'll have to be the judge of that," Bridger said warmly, taking one while it was still steaming. He bit into it and his eyes widened slightly. "Madam, I stand corrected. These might be the best I've ever had. Miss Fiona, you've got a real talent." She ducked her head, murmuring something that might have been thanks, and hurried back to the kitchen. Through the doorway, she could hear one of the miners doing his usual mockery. "Oh, they're just lovely, they are, so they are," he said in an exaggerated brogue, and several men laughed, but Bridger's voice cut through the laughter, calm but firm. "I don't find that particularly funny or kind. Lady made you a fine breakfast. Seems to me that deserves respect, not mockery." The dining room went silent. Fiona stood frozen in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the work table. "No offense meant," the miner said, but he sounded chastened. "Just having a bit of fun." "Fun should be had with folks, not at their expense," Bridger replied evenly. "That's how I was raised, anyway." The conversation moved on, but Fiona's hands were shaking. No one had defended her before. No one had suggested that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't her accent but the men who mocked it. She busied herself with dishes, trying to sort through the complicated knot of feelings in her chest. After breakfast, as the boarders dispersed to their various jobs, Bridger lingered. Fiona was clearing the table when he approached her, hat in hand. "Miss Fiona, I hope I didn't overstep in there. I just thought those fellows were being unkind." She shook her head quickly. "No, you didn't overstep, thank you." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger than his 30 or so years. "You're from Ireland, I take it," she nodded warily. "I had a neighbor growing up, family from County Cork. They talked like you. Always reminded me of music, the way they spoke. Like there was a song underneath the words." Fiona stared at him, stunned. No one had ever said anything like that about her accent. "You don't find it strange?" "Strange? No, not at all. Different from how folks talk around here, sure, but that doesn't make it strange. Makes it interesting." He settled his hat back on his head. "Anyway, I wanted to say that, and to thank you again for the fine breakfast. I've got meetings most of the day, but I'll see you at supper, I expect." He left before she could formulate a response, and Fiona stood in the empty dining room with a stack of dirty plates and a heart that felt oddly light for the first time since arriving in Arizona. Over the next 2 days, a pattern emerged. Bridger ate his meals at the boarding house and spent his days in town conducting business. He was always polite to Fiona, always thanked her for the food, and once asked her opinion on whether he should order the beef or the pork. She'd been so surprised to be consulted that she'd actually answered in a full sentence. "The beef is better today, I think. The pork is a bit tough." "Then beef it is. I trust your judgment." Such small exchanges, but they mattered. They made her feel seen as a person rather than as a servant or a curiosity. And she found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, noticing details like the way he always held the door for Mrs. Patterson, or how he helped clear his own dishes without being asked, unusual for a boarding house guest. On his 3rd evening, after supper was finished and the dishes were done, Fiona stepped out onto the back porch for a breath of air. The Arizona night had turned cool, the sky ablaze with more stars than she'd ever imagined existed. She was humming an old Irish tune, something her mother used to sing, when a voice from the darkness startled her. "That's pretty. What is it?" She gasped and turned to find Bridger sitting on the porch steps, nearly invisible in the shadows. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was out here. I'll go." "No, please don't. I didn't mean to scare you. I just came out for some quiet and then I heard you humming. It's a nice tune." Fiona hesitated, torn between the safety of retreat and a sudden, surprising desire to stay. The desire won. She moved to the other end of the porch, leaning against the railing. "It's called The Parting Glass. It's a traditional song from home. You must miss it. Home, I mean." "I do," she admitted. "But there was nothing left for me there. My parents died 2 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My brother went to Boston, but I wanted to go somewhere different, somewhere I could make a fresh start. That's brave, coming all this way alone." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Is it bravery when you have no other choice?" "I think so, yeah. Plenty of folks with no choice just give up." "You didn't." He paused, and she could hear him shift on the steps. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business, because it probably isn't. All right. Why don't you talk much? I've noticed you hardly say 2 words at meals, and when you do, you look like you're bracing for a blow." The question was so direct, so perceptive, that Fiona didn't know how to deflect it. The darkness made it easier to be honest. "Because of how I sound. Because men laugh at my accent and make jokes, and it's easier to say nothing than to give them ammunition." Bridger was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I can understand that, but it seems a shame. Silence might protect you from their mockery, but it also means they've won, doesn't it? They've made you feel like you have to hide part of yourself. What's the alternative? Let them keep laughing." "The alternative is to speak anyway and let them reveal themselves as fools. Your accent isn't a flaw, Miss Fiona. It's part of who you are, part of where you come from. And your voice." He stood and walked closer, his face becoming clearer in the starlight. "Your voice sounds like home to me." Fiona's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean it sounds warm and real and honest. It sounds like someone who's lived through hard things but hasn't let it make them hard. It sounds like the kind of voice I could listen to every day and never get tired of hearing." He cleared his throat, suddenly seeming less confident. "I'm probably speaking out of turn. I tend to do that. But I wanted you to know that at least one person in this town thinks you should talk more, not less." She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken to her with such straightforward kindness, such simple acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks needed. I'm just telling the truth." He tipped his hat. "I should let you enjoy your evening. Good night, Miss Fiona." "Good night, Mr. Nash and Bridger." He turned back. "Yes, you can call me just Fiona." Even in the darkness, she could see his smile. "Then you should call me just Bridger. No Mr. needed." He went inside, and Fiona stayed on the porch for a long time, her mind spinning. "Your voice sounds like home to me." The words played over and over, and for the first time since leaving Ireland, she felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a possibility she hadn't dared imagine. The next morning, Bridger's business in town was concluded, and he prepared to return to his ranch. Fiona served breakfast as usual, but this time when he thanked her for the meal, she found the courage to speak more than a few words. "I hope your meetings went well, and that you have safe travels back to your ranch." Several of the miners glanced up, surprised to hear her speak, but no one made a joke. Maybe Bridger's earlier reprimand had made an impression, or maybe they simply sensed a change in her, a new resolve. "They went very well, thank you, and I'm sure the trip will be fine. It's beautiful country between here and there." He paused, then added, "Mrs. Patterson, I'll likely be back in town in a few weeks for more supplies and such. All right if I stay here again, of course, Mr. Nash. You're welcome anytime." His eyes met Fiona's briefly, and she thought she saw a question in them, or maybe a hope. Then he gathered his things and left, and the boarding house seemed duller without his presence. The weeks that followed were easier, though. Fiona began to speak more during meals, first just a word here and there, then full sentences. Some of the boarders still made occasional jokes, but she found that Bridger had been right. When she didn't let it silence her, when she simply continued on with dignity, the jokes fell flat. And a few of the kinder boarders even began asking her about Ireland, genuinely curious about her homeland. Mrs. Patterson noticed the change. "You're coming out of your shell. It's good to see. You've got a lovely speaking voice, you know. Musical." That word again. Musical. Maybe it was true. Maybe her accent wasn't something to hide, but simply a different melody in the diverse chorus of this rough frontier town. Bridger returned exactly 3 weeks later, riding into town on a warm October afternoon. Fiona was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard Mrs. Patterson call her name. "Fiona, dear, we've got our rancher guest back. Can you prepare the room at the end of the hall?" Her heart did a foolish little leap. "Of course, madam." She rushed through the preparation, making sure the room was spotless, the linens fresh, a pitcher of water and basin ready on the dresser. Then she changed her apron for a clean one and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. This was ridiculous. He was just a guest, just a kind man who defended her once. There was no reason to feel this way. But when he walked into the dining room that evening and his whole face lit up at the sight of her, she knew she was lying to herself. There was every reason to feel this way. "Fiona," he said warmly, "it's good to see you again." "It's good to see you too, Bridger. How is your ranch?" They talked for a few minutes. Easy conversation about his cattle and the autumn weather and the new well he was having dug. The other boarders ate and listened or talked among themselves, but Fiona noticed that several of them seemed to regard Bridger with a new respect. Word had apparently spread about the rancher who'd stood up for the Irish girl. After dinner, Fiona was washing dishes when Bridger appeared in the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Patterson had gone to her room with a headache, leaving Fiona to finish the cleanup. "Need any help?" he offered. "Oh no, I couldn't ask a guest to wash dishes." "You didn't ask. I offered. And I'm perfectly capable of drying." He picked up a towel before she could protest further and positioned himself next to the drying rack. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you, and this seemed like a good opportunity." Fiona's hands paused in the soapy water. "Talk to me about what?" "I've been thinking about you. A lot, actually, these past few weeks. More than is probably appropriate for someone I've only met a handful of times." He dried a plate with careful attention, not looking at her. "I'm not usually a man who beats around the bush, so I'm just going to say this straight out. I'd like to court you, Fiona, properly, if you'd be amenable to that." The dish she'd been holding slipped back into the water with a splash. "Court me?" "Yes, with your permission and Mrs. Patterson's blessing, of course. I know I live a ways out of town and ranching is a hard life, but I do well enough. I've got a good house and good land, and I could provide for a wife. Not lavishly, but comfortably. And I hope that we might suit each other." Fiona's mind raced. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt she knew something essential about him, something true. He was kind and honest and saw her as she truly was, accent and all. "I don't understand. You could court any woman. Why me?" Now he did look at her, his brown eyes serious. "Because when I'm around you, everything feels right. Because your voice does sound like home to me, and I can't explain it better than that. Because I think you're brave and strong and you make the best biscuits I've ever eaten." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "And because you're beautiful, though I probably should have led with that." "I'm not," she protested automatically. "You are. You just haven't had anyone tell you enough times for you to believe it." He set down the towel. "You don't have to answer right now. Think about it. I'll be in town for 3 days this time. But I want you to know that I'm serious about this. I've been looking for the right woman for a long time, and I think I've found her." Fiona's hands were trembling as she pulled them from the dishwater and dried them on her apron. "I don't need time to think about it. Yes, yes, I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across Bridger's face was like sunrise. "Yeah? Yeah," she echoed, laughing a little at the giddy feeling rising in her chest. "Well then." He seemed suddenly uncertain, this confident rancher reduced to boyish awkwardness. "I suppose we should ask Mrs. Patterson's permission, her being your employer and you living under her roof." "I suppose we should." Mrs. Patterson, when consulted, was surprised but pleased. "Mr. Nash, you're a good man, and I think you'd treat our Fiona right. You have my blessing, provided everything stays proper and respectable while she's living in my house." "You have my word, madam." And so it began. Bridger extended his stay in Clifton by 2 days, and he and Fiona spent every spare moment together that propriety allowed. He took her for a walk along the San Francisco River, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the history of the area. She told him more about Ireland, about her childhood and her family, and the pain of leaving everything familiar behind. "Do you regret it?" he asked as they sat on a flat rock overlooking the water. "Coming here?" "No," she said, and realized she meant it. "It was hard and lonely, and I felt lost for a while. But if I hadn't come, I wouldn't have met you." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I'm glad you came. I know that's selfish, considering what you went through to get here, but I'm glad anyway." They talked about his ranch, about what life would be like if they did eventually marry. Bridger was honest about the challenges, the isolation, the hard work, the constant battle against weather and predators and market forces. But he also painted a picture of a life Fiona could see herself living, a life with purpose and partnership. "I don't expect a wife to just cook and clean," he told her. "My mother ran our ranch alongside my father. She could rope a calf and doctor a sick cow as well as any man. She was a true partner to him. That's the kind of marriage I want." "I don't know anything about cattle," Fiona admitted. "You can learn. You're smart and capable. And I don't know anything about making biscuits like yours, but I'm willing to learn that too." He grinned. "See, we'll teach each other." When Bridger finally had to return to his ranch, they said goodbye on the boarding house porch, Mrs. Patterson watching discreetly from the window to ensure propriety. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," he promised. "And I'll write. I'm not much of a letter writer, but I'll try." "I'll write too," Fiona said. Then, daringly, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Be safe." His hand came up to touch where her lips had been, his expression tender. "You too. Take care of yourself, Fiona Laurent." The next 2 weeks crawled by. Fiona threw herself into her work, but her mind was always partly elsewhere, imagining life on Bridger's ranch, wondering if this miraculous turn of events was real or just a dream. His letter arrived after 10 days, written in a clear, strong hand. "Dear Fiona, I'm not good with fancy words, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. The ranch seems emptier now, knowing you exist in the world. I find myself imagining you here, seeing it through your eyes. I think you'd like it. There's a creek that runs through the property and cottonwood trees that turn gold in the fall. The house needs a woman's touch. I built it sturdy but not pretty. You could fix that. I'm counting the days until I see you again. Yours, Bridger." Fiona read the letter so many times she could recite it from memory. She wrote back, telling him about her days at the boarding house, about the funny things Mrs. Patterson said, about how she'd started teaching some of the nicer boarders a few Irish songs. She signed it "Yours, Fiona," and felt bold doing so. When Bridger returned, he brought gifts. A length of blue calico fabric he thought would suit her, and a small leather-bound book of poetry. The woman at the store said ladies like poetry. I don't know if that's true for you, but I thought I'd take the chance." "I love poetry," Fiona said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "My mother used to read it to me." This visit, they fell into an even easier rhythm. Bridger helped around the boarding house without being asked, fixing a loose step and a sticking door. The other boarders got used to seeing them together, and a few even expressed approval. "Good man, that Nash," one old miner told Fiona. "Treats you right. You could do worse." On Bridger's last evening in town, he asked Mrs. Patterson if he could take Fiona for a proper evening walk. The older woman agreed, provided they stayed on well-traveled streets and returned before full dark. They walked through Clifton as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town was settling down for the evening, the daytime bustle fading to a quieter rhythm. Bridger led her to a small park near the river, just a patch of grass and a few benches, but peaceful. "Fiona, I know we've only been courting a short time," he began, his voice nervous. "And I know I should probably wait longer, do this properly, but I'm not a young man anymore. I'm 32, and I've waited my whole life to find someone who feels like you do. So I'm going to ask, and you can say it's too soon and I'll wait, but I need you to know what I'm thinking." Her heart was pounding. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I want to marry you. I'm thinking I want to take you home to my ranch and build a life with you. I'm thinking I love you, Fiona Laurent, even though it's fast and probably foolish. But it's true." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my grandmother's. It's not fancy, but it's been in my family for 3 generations, and I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Tears blurred Fiona's vision. "Bridger, if it's too fast, just say so. We can wait. I'll keep courting you proper for as long as you need." "No," she said, and when his face fell, she quickly added, "No, I mean I don't want to wait. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too. I didn't think it was possible to feel this way so quickly, but I do." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it was meant to be there. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I'll need to give Mrs. Patterson notice," Fiona said practically, even as her heart soared. "It wouldn't be fair to leave her without help. Of course. I'm thinking we could marry before winter sets in hard, maybe in a month. That gives her time to find someone else and gives us time to prepare. I'll need to make sure the house is ready for you." A month sounds perfect. They told Mrs. Patterson that evening, and she cried happy tears and hugged Fiona tight. "I'm so pleased for you, dear, so pleased. And I suppose I always knew you wouldn't stay long. You're meant for more than serving meals in a boarding house." "There's no shame in this work," Fiona protested. "No shame at all, but there's no shame in wanting more either. You'll make a fine rancher's wife." The next month passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Patterson helped Fiona sew 2 new dresses, including one for the wedding. Bridger came to town twice more, bringing fabric and supplies, and once, shyly, a catalog from a furniture maker so Fiona could choose pieces for their home. "I want you to make it yours," he insisted. "Our home, not just my house." They talked about everything: children, finances, religion, daily life. Bridger wanted a family, and so did Fiona. He was Methodist, and she was Catholic, but both agreed they could work out their differences with respect and compromise. He told her honestly about his finances. The ranch was profitable but not wealthy, and some years were harder than others. She told him she was used to living frugally and could make a little stretch a long way. "We're going to be good together," Bridger said one evening, holding her hands in his. "I feel it in my bones." "So do I," Fiona agreed. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the small Catholic church in Clifton, with Father O'Brien officiating. Mrs. Patterson stood as Fiona's witness, and Bridger's closest neighbor, a rancher named Tom Winters, stood as his. A handful of the kinder boarders attended, along with some of Bridger's business associates from town. It was a simple ceremony, but heartfelt. When Father O'Brien asked Bridger to repeat his vows, his voice rang out clear and strong. I, Bridger Nash, take you, Fiona Laurent, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, all the days of my life. Fiona's voice shook slightly as she repeated her own vows, her Irish accent clear and unashamed. I, Fiona Laurent, take you, Bridger Nash, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, all the days of my life. You may kiss your bride, Father O'Brien said with a smile. Bridger cupped Fiona's face gently and kissed her, and the small congregation applauded. They were married. She was Fiona Nash now, rancher's wife, pioneer woman, no longer alone in the world. The journey to the ranch took most of the day, traveling north into the mountains on a road that grew progressively rougher. But Fiona didn't mind. She sat beside Bridger on the wagon seat, their belongings packed in the bed behind them, and felt nothing but anticipation. There, Bridger said as they crested a ridge. That's home. The ranch spread out below them, a valley carved out of the mountains with a creek running silver through the middle. The house was exactly as he described, sturdy, two-story with a wide porch. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a stable, a chicken coop, what looked like a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark spots against the golden grass. It's beautiful, Fiona breathed. Wait until you see it in spring. Everything turns green and wildflowers bloom everywhere. But even in winter, it's got a certain charm. He drove the wagon down the ridge and across the valley to the house. I hired 2 hands to help with the cattle. They live in the bunkhouse and take their meals there, so we'll have privacy in the main house. But they're good men, and they'll be respectful. He introduced her to the ranch hands, Sam and Diego, both of whom tipped their hats politely and welcomed her. Then Bridger carried her over the threshold of their home, and Fiona got her first look at the place where she'd spend her life. The main room was large and open, with a fireplace dominating one wall and a kitchen area taking up another. Stairs led to the second floor where there were 3 bedrooms. The furniture was simple but well made, and true to his word, Bridger had left much of the decorating for her to do. I know it's not much, he began, but she stopped him with a kiss. It's perfect. It's ours. That first night in their home, they learned each other in the way of new spouses, tentative and sweet and full of discovery. Bridger was gentle, attentive to Fiona's nervousness, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest, Fiona felt a peace she'd never known before. I didn't think I'd find this, she whispered. A home, a partner, someone who loves me as I am. You deserve all of that and more. His hand stroked her hair. Your voice still sounds like home to me, Fiona, now more than ever. She smiled against his skin. And yours sounds like home to me too. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Fiona had to learn the rhythms of ranch life. The early mornings, the constant work, the isolation. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and town was a half-day's journey. But she also discovered a freedom she'd never experienced in Ireland or in the boarding house. Here, she could speak as much as she wanted, sing her Irish songs while she worked, read poetry aloud to the chickens if she felt like it. Bridger loved hearing her voice, and he told her so often. She learned to ride a horse, though she was nervous at first. Bridger taught her with patience, walking beside her until she felt confident enough to go faster. She learned to recognize the signs of sick cattle and to help with basic doctoring. She learned to shoot a rifle, necessary in country where mountain lions and the occasional bear posed threats to livestock and humans alike. "You're a natural," Bridger said proudly after she hit her target 3 times in a row. "I'm motivated," Fiona replied. "I'm not about to let some animal hurt you or our home." She also threw herself into making the house truly theirs. She sewed curtains from the calico Bridger had given her during their courtship and made cushions for the chairs. She planted an herb garden near the kitchen door and started planning a vegetable garden for spring. She wrote letters to Mrs. Patterson and received Newswire replies about life at the boarding house. In return, Fiona shared her world with Bridger. She taught him Irish songs, and his deep voice blended surprisingly well with her clear soprano. She recited poetry to him in the evenings, and he listened with genuine interest, sometimes asking her to explain a particularly complex metaphor. She told him stories about Ireland, about the legends and myths her grandmother had passed down. "It's like having a whole library married to me," he joked one night. "You know so much. Just different things than you know. You can read the weather and the land and the cattle. I can read books. We balance each other." "That we do." Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and cold that was different from Ireland's damp chill, but no less challenging. Bridger had prepared well, though, with plenty of firewood and supplies laid in. The cattle were hardy enough to withstand the weather, though Sam and Diego had to ride out regularly to check on them and break ice on the water sources. Fiona spent the snowed-in days cooking, sewing, reading, and learning to manage the household accounts. Bridger taught her about the ranch's finances, showing her everything openly. "If something happens to me, I want you to be able to run this place," he said seriously. "You're not just my wife, you're my partner. You need to know everything." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Fiona said, but she appreciated his transparency. They grew closer during those winter months, confined largely to the house and each other's company. They learned each other's moods and habits, how to give each other space when needed and how to come together when wanted. They laughed a lot. Bridger had a dry sense of humor that caught Fiona off guard, and she discovered she could make him laugh until tears ran down his face with her dramatic retellings of boarding house incidents. "You're good for me," he told her one snowy evening as they sat by the fire. "I was getting set in my ways, too serious. You remind me to find joy. You're good for me, too. You gave me back my voice." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "You always had your voice, love. I just made sure you knew it was worth hearing." Spring came gradually, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots. Fiona planted her vegetable garden with seeds Bridger ordered from a catalog, and she tended it carefully. She also discovered she was pregnant, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. "We're going to have a baby," she told Bridger one evening, her voice shaking, his face transformed, cycling through shock to wonder to pure elation. "Truly, we're going to be parents, truly. I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there." He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should I ride for the doctor?" Fiona laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I'm fine. Women have babies every day. And we have months yet before the doctor is needed." But Bridger was a worrier throughout her pregnancy. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy or work too hard. He rode into Clifton to consult with the doctor about what to expect and what to prepare. He read every book and pamphlet on childbirth he could find, much to Fiona's amusement. "You're going to wear yourself out with worry," she told him. "I can't help it. You're precious to me, and so is this baby." As her belly grew, Fiona sometimes felt overwhelmed by the enormity of bringing a child into the world, but Bridger's steady presence calmed her. He talked to the baby through her stomach, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they'd do together. "Are you hoping for a boy?" Fiona asked one night. Bridger considered the question seriously. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't imagined teaching a son to ride and rope. But honestly, a daughter would be just as welcome. I'd love to have a little girl with your eyes and your voice." "She'd have your eyes," Fiona predicted. "They're much nicer than mine. We'll have to agree to disagree on that." In late autumn, with the leaves turning gold and the air crisp, Fiona went into labor. Bridger had brought a midwife from a neighboring ranch to stay with them for the final weeks, and the woman, Mrs. Hendricks, proved her worth. She guided Fiona through the long hours of labor with calm competence while Bridger paced downstairs, forbidden from the birthing room but too anxious to do anything useful. When the baby finally arrived, Mrs. Hendricks called Bridger upstairs. He entered the bedroom to find Fiona exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a quilt Fiona had made during her pregnancy. "It's a boy," Fiona said, her voice tired but full of joy. "A healthy boy." Bridger approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny features, his eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. "He's perfect," Bridger breathed. "You're perfect, both of you. Do you want to hold him?" Bridger sat carefully on the edge of the bed and accepted the baby with trembling hands. The infant stirred, making small mewling sounds, and Bridger's eyes filled with tears. "Hello, son. I'm your father, and I'm going to do my best by you, I promise." They named him Connor after Fiona's father, with the middle name James after Bridger's father. Connor Nash grew into a lively, curious child who loved the ranch and everything on it. He took his first steps chasing chickens and said his first word watching his father work with the horses. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and louder with a child in the house. Fiona managed motherhood and ranch wife duties with the same determination she'd brought to everything else, though there were hard days when she felt overwhelmed. But Bridger was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with a crying Connor, changing diapers without complaint, and playing endless games on the floor with their son. "You're a better father than you give yourself credit for," Fiona told him one evening as they watched Connor sleep in his cradle. "I just love him so much. And you gave me this family I never thought I'd have. We gave each other this family." As Connor grew, he absorbed both his parents' strengths. He had Bridger's easy confidence and Fiona's quick mind, and he grew up hearing his mother's Irish accent, never thinking it strange or funny, just part of who she was. Fiona sang him the songs her mother had sung to her, and told him stories about the grandparents he'd never meet but who lived on in family lore. When Connor was 3, Fiona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier and she was less anxious, knowing what to expect. Bridger was still a worrier, but he hid it better, not wanting to transfer his anxiety to their son. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the wildflowers Bridger had promised were blooming in profusion across the valley. She had Fiona's green eyes and would grow to have her mother's features, but she had her father's temperament. Calm, steady, observant. "What should we name her?" Bridger asked, cradling his daughter with the same wonder he'd shown with Connor. "I was thinking Bridget after you." "We could call her Birdie." His eyes widened. "You do that. You gave Connor my father's name. It's only fair our daughter carries yours. Bridger Nash. Birdie, I like it." He looked down at the baby. "Hello, little Birdie. Welcome to the world." The ranch prospered over the years. Bridger expanded the herd and improved the grazing lands. He developed a reputation for raising quality cattle and for being a fair dealer. Fiona's gardens produced abundantly, and she began selling produce and preserves in Clifton, bringing in extra income and making friends among the town's women. Connor and Bertie grew up wild and free, learning to ride as soon as they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able. Connor was the adventurous one, always exploring the furthest reaches of the ranch, while Bertie was more content to stay close to home, helping her mother in the garden or learning to cook. "They're so different," Fiona marveled one day. "Takes after different sides of the family," Bridger said. "Connor's got my wandering spirit, Bertie's got your homebody heart." "I wasn't always a homebody. I traveled halfway across the world, remember?" "True enough. Maybe she's got my homebody heart then. The one I didn't know I had until I met you." When Connor was 8 and Bertie was 5, Fiona became pregnant again unexpectedly. She was 32, and while not old by any means, she'd thought her childbearing years might be winding down. But here she was, preparing to welcome another child. This pregnancy was harder. Fiona was tired more often, and she couldn't do as much around the ranch. Bridger picked up the slack without complaint, and Connor and Bertie stepped up to help more with chores. The whole family pulled together. The baby, another boy, arrived in the dead of winter. The birth was long and difficult, and afterward the doctor took Bridger aside. "She's all right, but I don't recommend any more pregnancies. It would be too risky." Bridger's face was pale. "She'll be fine, though. She'll recover." "Yes, with rest and care, but I'm serious about no more children." "I hear you, and I'll make sure she hears you too." They named the baby Patrick, another nod to Fiona's Irish heritage. He was smaller than his siblings had been, but he was healthy and strong in his way. Fiona recovered slowly, and true to the doctor's warning, Bridger was extremely careful about not risking another pregnancy. "I love our children," he told her firmly, "but I love you more. I won't risk losing you." Patrick grew to be the gentlest of the 3 children, with a gift for animals. He could calm a nervous horse or a frightened cow with just his voice and touch. He also inherited his mother's love of music and learning, spending hours listening to her stories and songs. "He's going to be a scholar," Bridger predicted, "or maybe a veterinarian." "As long as he's happy," Fiona said. The years passed, full and rich. There were hard times, droughts that tested their water resources, harsh winters that killed cattle, market fluctuations that affected their income. But there were more good times than bad. Successful cattle drives, children's milestones, anniversaries celebrated, friends made and kept. Fiona's accent never fully faded, though it did soften slightly over the years. But she never lost her pride in it, never again let anyone make her feel ashamed of how she spoke. And when Connor was 10, she overheard him defending another child at school, a boy from Germany who spoke with a thick accent. "So what if he talks different?" Connor said hotly. "My mother talks different too, and she's the smartest person I know. Maybe you should spend less time mocking people and more time learning something." Fiona's heart swelled with pride. Her son had learned the lesson she and Bridger had taught by example, that differences were to be celebrated, not mocked. When Bridger turned 45, Connor asked him about the day he'd met Fiona. They were out riding fence line together, a father-son task they did several times a year. "Tell me again how you knew Mom was the one," Connor said. Bridger smiled, the memory still vivid even after 14 years of marriage. "I heard her voice and it just sounded right, like home. And then I got to know her and she was everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. She was brave and kind and smart, and she'd come all this way to make a new life. How could I not fall in love with her? Do you think I'll know like that? When I meet the right girl, maybe. Everyone's different. But I think you'll know when someone makes you want to be better, when their happiness matters more than your own. That's love." Connor nodded thoughtfully. "I hope I find someone like you and Mom have." I hope so too, son. You deserve that kind of happiness. That evening, Bridger relayed the conversation to Fiona as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. He's growing up so fast, Fiona said with a touch of melancholy. They all are, but we've raised them right. They're good kids. They are. She leaned against his shoulder. We did well, didn't we? Despite everything, we built something good here. We did, and we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us still. What do you want those years to hold? Bridger thought about it. More of this. More sunsets with you. Watching our children grow into themselves. Maybe grandchildren someday, though don't let Connor know I'm already thinking about that. Growing old together on this ranch we've built. That sounds perfect, Fiona said softly. Exactly perfect. As the years continued to unfold, that's precisely what happened. Connor grew into a fine young man and eventually married a schoolteacher from Clifton, bringing her to the ranch and building a house of his own on Nash land. Birdie surprised everyone by wanting to continue her education, and with her parents' blessing, she went to a teacher's college in Tucson, returning with a degree and a determination to open a school in their area. Patrick, true to Bridger's prediction, became fascinated with animal medicine. When he was 18, he apprenticed with a veterinarian in Tucson and eventually came back to the area to practice, serving the ranching community with the same gentle skill he'd shown since childhood. Grandchildren arrived in due course, first from Connor and his wife Emma, then eventually from Birdie after she married a fellow teacher, and finally from Patrick and his wife Rosa, a Mexican-American woman whose family had ranched in Arizona for generations. Fiona and Bridger watched their family expand with joy and pride. The ranch that had once housed just the two of them now sprawled with 3 family homes, multiple generations working the land together. Sunday dinners became grand affairs with dozens of people around an expanded table, laughter and conversation filling the air. Through it all, Bridger never stopped telling Fiona that her voice sounded like home to him. Even when they were old and gray, sitting on that same porch watching yet another sunset, he'd turn to her and say it. Your voice still sounds like home to me, Fiona Nash. And she'd smile, taking his weathered hand in hers and reply, after all these years, you still sound like home to me too. They were in their 70s when Bridger's health began to fail. His heart, the doctors said, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and worry. Fiona nursed him with devoted care, reading poetry to him, singing the old Irish songs and reminiscing about their decades together. I'm not afraid, he told her one afternoon as they sat together in the bedroom they'd shared for almost 50 years. I've had a good life, the best life, because of you. Don't talk like that, Fiona said, though tears streamed down her face. You're not going anywhere yet. We both know that's not true, but it's all right, love, I'm ready. I just wish I could have more time with you. We've had so much time, so many blessings. Never enough time with you. He squeezed her hand weakly. But I'm grateful for every day we had. You took a chance on a rancher who was too forward and too fast with his declarations of love. You took a chance on a girl who was ashamed to speak, Fiona countered. And you taught me that my voice mattered. It always mattered. It always will. He closed his eyes, tired but peaceful. Keep talking to me, Fiona. Let your voice be the last thing I hear. So she did. She talked about their wedding day, their children's births, the first time Connor rode a horse alone, the way Birdie had looked in her graduation gown, Patrick's gentleness with injured animals. She talked about quiet mornings and busy afternoons, about winter snows and summer heat, about all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that had made up their life together. Bridger Nash died peacefully in his sleep that night, Fiona's hand in his, her voice in his ears. The funeral was massive, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. Bridger had been well loved and widely respected, a pillar of the ranching community. But no one mourned him more deeply than Fiona, who had lost her partner, her love, her home. The weeks after were dark. Fiona went through the motions, accepting condolences, managing details, but feeling hollow inside. Her children worried about her, trying to coax her to eat, to rest, to engage with life again. It was her oldest grandchild, Connor's son Liam, who finally reached her. He was 15, old enough to understand grief but young enough to still believe in healing. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, finding her sitting alone on the porch, "would you teach me one of those Irish songs you used to sing? Papa always said your voice was special. I'd like to learn." Something in Fiona's chest loosened slightly. "Which song would you like to learn?" "The one about going home. The Parting Glass, I think it's called." Fiona's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "That was one of your grandfather's favorites. He first heard me humming it the night we fell in love." She began to sing, her voice wavering at first but growing stronger. Liam listened intently, then tried to follow along. His voice cracked and missed notes, but he persisted, and by the end they were singing together, grandmother and grandson, old words and new voices blending. When they finished, Fiona felt lighter than she had since Bridger's death. "Thank you," she told Liam. "I needed that." "Papa wouldn't want you to stop singing," Liam said with the simple wisdom of youth. "He loved your voice too much for that." He was right. Slowly, painfully, Fiona began to re-engage with life. She couldn't run the ranch anymore, that fell to Connor now, but she could still help in the garden, still cook for family dinners, still tell stories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren as they arrived. She lived another 12 years after Bridger's death, years full of family and memory. She saw Connor's children marry and have children of their own. She saw Bertie's school flourish and become a cornerstone of the community. She saw Patrick's veterinary practice expand to serve 3 counties. And she kept her voice strong, kept speaking with the Irish accent that had once shamed her, but now stood as a badge of her journey, her strength, her identity. When people asked about it, she told them the story of a rancher who'd heard her speak and said her voice sounded like home. "And it did," she'd say. "It sounded like home to him, and he sounded like home to me. And together, we built a home that's lasted generations." Fiona Nash died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, surrounded by family in the house she and Bridger had built. Her children and grandchildren gathered to remember her. Her strength, her kindness, her music, her stories, her unwavering love for the man who'd seen her worth when she doubted it herself. They buried her next to Bridger on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that turned gold every fall. At the funeral, Liam led the family in singing The Parting Glass, the song that had meant so much to his grandmother. Dozens of voices rose together, some with Irish lilt, some with Western drawl, some with Mexican rhythm, all blending into a chorus that honored the woman who taught them that differences made the world richer, not poorer. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations of Nashes who remembered the story of their matriarch and patriarch. They told it to their children and their children's children. How an Irish immigrant girl came to Arizona territory ashamed of her voice. How a rancher heard her speak and fell in love not despite her accent but because of it. How they built a life and a legacy together based on acceptance, respect, and love. And on quiet evenings when the Arizona wind blew through the valley, some said you could still hear 2 voices on that wind. One with an Irish lilt, one with a Texas drawl, speaking words of love that had echoed across 50 years and would echo for 50 more. Because true love doesn't end with death. It lives on in the family it created, the land it tended, the stories it left behind. The Nash Ranch stood as testament to a simple truth, that when you find someone who makes your voice feel like home, and whose voice sounds like home to you, you've found something precious and rare. And if you're wise enough to recognize it and brave enough to pursue it, you can build something that lasts not just a lifetime, but generations. In Clifton, Arizona, and in the mountains beyond, the story of Bridger and Fiona Nash became legend, a reminder that love could bloom in the unlikeliest places, between the unlikeliest people, and create something beautiful and enduring. That a young woman fleeing poverty and a rancher building a dream could find each other across all the differences of language and background and culture, and make something magnificent together. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the land they homesteaded, still work the cattle in those mountain valleys, still tell the story of how it all began. And when they do, they always include that pivotal moment, a rancher hearing an Irish accent for the first time and recognizing in it not something foreign or strange, but something infinitely precious. "Your voice sounds like home to me," he'd said. 5 simple words that changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would span more than a century. 5 words that reminded everyone who heard the story that love isn't about sameness or perfection. It's about recognition, acceptance, and the courage to say yes to possibility even when it comes wrapped in an unexpected package. The sun sets over the Nash Ranch every evening, painting the mountains in brilliant colors, and if you listen carefully, you might hear echoes of that original conversation, that first connection between 2 lonely souls who found in each other everything they'd been seeking. An accent that spoke of heritage and courage, a voice that promised home and belonging, a love that built an empire not of wealth or power, but of family and memory and enduring devotion. That's the story of Fiona Laurent, who became Fiona Nash, who came to the Arizona territory ashamed of her voice, and found a man who heard in it the sound of home. And it's the story of Bridger Nash, who built a ranch in the wilderness and filled it with love when he found the right woman to share it with. Together, they proved that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest moments. A kind word, an acceptance, a recognition that someone else's difference is actually what makes them perfect. Their story lives on, generation after generation, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and build legacies. And every Nash who walks that land, who tends those cattle, who looks out over those mountains, knows they're standing on a foundation built by 2 people who refuse to let fear or shame or prejudice keep them from the love they deserved. That's the real Wild West story, not one of gunfights or gold rushes, but of hearts that found each other across distances of culture and geography, and chose to build something lasting and true. In a time and place that was often harsh and unforgiving, Bridger and Fiona Nash created an oasis of acceptance and love that would sustain their family for generations. And it all started with those words, "Your voice sounds like home to me." Words that gave Fiona back her pride, that opened the door to a life she'd never imagined possible, that proved sometimes the things we're most ashamed of are actually our greatest gifts, if we can find someone with the wisdom to recognize them. The end of their individual stories was just the beginning of a much larger narrative. A family that flourished, a ranch that prospered, a community that benefited from their example. Bridger and Fiona Nash lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something precious. The knowledge that when we embrace what makes us different and find others who celebrate those differences, we create something stronger than either of us could build alone. Their voices are silent now, But their story continues, carried forward by every generation that follows, every child who hears the tale and learns from it, every heart that finds courage in knowing that somewhere in the Arizona mountains, an Irish girl and a Texas rancher proved that love could overcome any obstacle, bridge any difference, and create something beautiful that would outlast them both. That's the legacy of Bridger and Fiona Nash. Not wealth or fame, but love multiplied across generations. A family that knows its roots and honors them. A story that reminds us all that our voices matter. Our differences are gifts, and the right person will hear in us not something to be fixed or changed, but something that sounds exactly like home.